Okay, so here we are with Michael Drolet. Michael is a former student of mine who, not from Central, he graduated from East Stroudsburg High School when I taught there. And Mr. Hodge is here with me as well, and we're going to talk to Michael about his career in theater and acting a little bit. So, Michael, let's just start. Can you kind of give everybody an overview of your training, like where you went to college,
Sure.
what kind of other classes and things that you took in the interim?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll probably start with a fun story. I started with piano, like when I was a kid, so that sort of got me into this. And then it was sort of choir was the next sort of thing. And then obviously band was sort of like followed suit. But all those things sort of help kind of guide you to kind of where you wanted to go. And for me, I realized like I really loved being on stage, and we were very lucky to have the performing arts that we had in the Poconos, like with Pocono Lively Arts we had there. We had great musicals that we did, because you directed the music inside the orchestra, right? Because I remember like our senior year we did like Into the Woods, and that was a huge undertaking. So so I feel like all that sort of set me up for what I wanted to do. And I do remember having a choir director who I won't name. I remember walking in one time and he was talking about me, and I remember it just destroyed me. But I also remembered that it also ignited me to realize if this person is someone that you care about, but I had to prove him wrong, you know? And so I just remember some really hurtful words, like the idea of, you know, if you got first chair for districts, if Michael got first chair for 10 or 2, then anybody can. And I just remember those words really hurting me. And then I remember when I decided I wanted to go into musical theater, he sat me down and said, Michael, you don't have what it takes to make it on Broadway, so I think you should consider going into teaching, because that may be something a little more solid for you. And I remember just looking at him, and the tears just filled up my eyes, because I'd already made the decision that this is what I wanted to do, and I was already ready to go to school. But that being said, that just goes to show you that that's just one person's opinions, and that adults aren't always perfect, you know, and just because they're older than you doesn't mean that they're necessarily wiser. And, you know, I was grateful that I was able to use that as fuel to propel me forward. But a lot of people, you know, they can hear something like that and it can tear them down. But I think the biggest thing I want to encourage the kids to realize is that if you do what you love in life, you're never going to work a single day, you know. And that was the biggest thing, is that I just knew that I had this love for this, and so I fought. But that being said, it wasn't an easy path. I ended up going to the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, and I graduated there in 2002. So I studied musical theater there. But I was lucky because the summers we were in Philadelphia, so I was lucky towards the end of each semester I could start auditioning in New York. So I would get a summer gig. It would either be at, like I said earlier, at Timbers Dinner Theater in Mount Gretna, which is not far from where you guys are. I remember working at the Fulton Opera House one summer as well. I worked at Dorney Park 2 summers as a dancer and a singer in their shows there. And I just remembered the more exposure you get and the more you work, you're going to eventually get, you know, you're building up your sort of your bag of tricks, you know. And I was lucky enough in college to really work at dancing, and I think that really helped me book a lot of jobs right when I graduated college, because I was able to already, as a singer, be fine, and as an actor, be fine. But when you can kind of combine that with dancing, it was so awesome. So I got to do shows like I did West Side Story twice. I've done A Chorus Line twice, and that would have never happened had I not gone to musical theater school and learned sort of the art of, you know, dancing. And I just, you know, really worked hard. So that's kind of how school happened. Did that answer that question?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. And yeah. I think your comment about the teacher that, you know, that you heard talking and kind of sitting down and saying, you know, hey, you should do this or whatever. I can imagine that's like a gut-wrenching moment. And one of my questions that I had, you kind of touched on it, but we have a lot of people in the curricular program as well as the extracurricular program, where they're learning the acting in class, but also doing it in extracurricular stuff, that are kicking tires on the business of acting and whether or not they should get involved in musical theater particularly. And I see that a lot, where we have an environment where our concept is, if you want it, go for it.
Absolutely.
You know, and so, like, is there something that you could say to the several performers that we have in our company that are literally really kicking tires, but maybe dealing with some family members or friends who are saying, that's what a waste, do something, you know, don't do something a little bit more
practical.
Practical, right?
Yeah.
Any words of wisdom or like inspiration to those guys?
Yeah, well, I think if anything, let me be that inspiration, right? So I came from a family where, I was the only one in my family that graduated from college. And, so they just didn't understand the vision that I had. But I think I knew that if I didn't go to school for it, I wasn't going to be able to make it at all, and I just think that's the whole thing is if there's just one person you can see and you can see that they, I'm going to tell you, I'm not the most talented person. I just work my butt off, and I'm nice to work with, and I try my hardest, But that being said, if you want it bad enough, that's the most important thing. And I think it's funny because I know later we'll probably talk on where my career is going, but I am absolutely going to go back into acting. So I may be taking a hiatus right now. I'll be graduating interior design school, but I'm absolutely going to be auditioning in the next, year once that can happen. So I will tell you, it's innate in me, and it's something where I thought I needed to step away from it, but I will tell you, I can't stop thinking about it. And so that's the beautiful part is, again, if you really, really want it bad enough, it's going to happen, and if you're willing to put the work in, and knowing that there's going to be so many challenges, but you got to have some thick skin. So maybe in, the greater picture is maybe that those words that really destroyed me also taught me a lot about, well, how bad do I want this? And I want this so much worse than and I use that to propel me. But, there will always be criticisms. I mean, it's just natural in this. And I think what's hard too as artists, not to take it personally, right? Because if you did a math problem and you answered it incorrectly, you don't really take it personally. But the moment you've created a piece of art that's a part of you, which it should be, good art should be an extension of yourself, that I think, you have to be ready for those criticisms and have a little bit of thick skin, but also know that, for that one negative thing, you may get 4 positive, remarks. So it really, it's just, you have to consider the source, and again, I think why I wanted to say that is not about putting this teacher down, or, but again, realizing that we, because I also teach musical theater, that every word we say to the students are so important. They're listening to these things. So I'm very careful when I talk to them. Like if I have a student that's kind of getting a little out of control, I turn to them and I say, I need you to be the leader, and I know you can be, just about, changing your words a little bit, just to know that, we don't know what their family lives are like. And sometimes they just need the encouragement, and then there are the other kids that you have to kind of put them in their place if they're getting out of control or their egos are a little bit greater than it needs to be. But at the end of the day, I don't know if that answered that. I apologize.
Yeah, no, you're talking specifically about, learning to take criticism when things aren't going your way, grit, resiliency,
Absolutely.
Those things. And I love, we've talked to a lot of people over the years too, and continuing this idea of, if you love something and you get involved in something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. It's fantastic.
Exactly.
It's so true. And you also talked about, I want to drive this home to everybody too, who's watching. You talked about not being a jerk when you're working with people. If you're being professional, you're not a jerk. People want to work with you.
I can't tell you how many times over the years, in 20 years of acting, I mean, it's funny because sometimes I get mixed up of which show I did these people with, did with these people first, because you'll constantly see the same faces over and over again if you're doing well. And I can't tell you how many times I didn't even have to go back to New York to re-audition because they were like, nope, we're just going to send you here, and if you're kind, it's going to go a long way, because there are a lot of egomaniacs and there are a lot of jerks, but there's also, you'll see the kinder people are the ones that thrive the most, and the greatest thing that I can tell you that it took me a long time to learn, I'm 40 now, but the biggest thing I learned a couple of years ago is that there's enough room in this world for every single person's talent. And just because you may look similar to that other person and maybe they got the part over you, it's okay. Your time is coming, and just, there's enough room for everyone's talent, and you don't have to be cutthroat. Not everyone has to be competition. Let them in anything be inspiration and encouraging, but don't look at each other as if you're each other's threat, if that makes sense. Because a lot of times you are set up to do so, and you don't really want to do that. And especially, in theater, that it's every person has such a huge part of it. You know what I mean? And I grew up always in the ensemble, and I loved it. I never ever feel like I've done anything wrong if I booked the ensemble. I'm grateful to have a job, and I can't tell you how many times when you see a Broadway show, you can see that ensemble and you don't realize that girl could go on for Elsa tomorrow night, or that girl may go on for another lead the following night, and now they're back in the ensemble. You don't know what things that they can juggle. So there's always a place for anything, and so, yeah, I'll get into that later, but ensemble jobs are kind of where it's at, they're the ones that are, once you book one of those, if you can hold on to that's the way to go. So.
That's awesome information, Michael. The part about the choir teacher, I didn't know that, but that's an interesting perspective, and I know who you're talking about, and I know that I know that his intention was to give you to give you advice that would be real, and
Right.
and I say the same types of things to my students, maybe not the same way, but
Right.
but I kind of feel the same way when a student says I want to go into music performance. I kind of say the same thing. Like it's tough. It's a tough world, and if you want to go that route, then
Absolutely
you need to make sure that it's your passion. And if it is your passion, and if you can't picture yourself doing anything else, then you really don't have a choice. You've got to do it. And
Absolutely.
I don't
Otherwise, you live your life with regret if you didn't even try, right?
Yeah.
And I think what was hard too is that I had already gotten a scholarship for a college, and I thought just because that teacher didn't like that college. But again, this teacher was trying to mold me into the opera performance, which is sort of what East Stroudsburg was kind of known for. Everyone did a lot of legit, musical theater. And for me, I just had that loud belted voice that was cringy to him, but it's what got me all my jobs. You know what I mean? And so I just knew that I had to go into musical theater, and that's really what I loved anyway. I wanted to be the funny guy. I wanted to be the belter. I wanted to be all these things. And thank goodness I had a program at a school that said, we know this is gold and we can give you anything. We'll give you any one of these roles, and we know that you're going to just try your best and go for it, no matter what they gave me. I mean, there was one number in college where it was a 10-minute long piece and it was 40 pages long. And it was about the Texas Bell Tower Sniper by, who's the gentleman that wrote Cats in the Cradle? I can't think of his name. But anyway, I remember just being a huge undertaking. And he said, not only are you going to play the Texas Bell Tower Sniper, but you're going to play the ensemble, and you're going to have to play all these roles. And I did it. And I remember just thinking this person really believed in me, and he knew that I would handle it and get it done, but,
that's awesome. That's good advice.
Yeah. And I think for me, even as a teacher, I don't know everything, so that's not fair to me, even to say to a student, well, you may not be right for it. We don't even know what's going to be in style in the next 3 years. Trends are changing, what's in is changing, and even with musical theater, they're not really doing a lot of classic musical theater. You get your revivals, but really everything is we have 6 on Broadway. We have all these shows that are really pop, and they're really in a very different direction, and that teacher didn't see the value in that at the time. And I'm just grateful that I happen to have the right kind of talent for that sort of world. Because ultimately most of the shows that I did were, I guess in a lot of ways they were, I would do a lot of pop shows, but I also worked at opera houses. So really it just depends, you got to kind of be well-rounded. So.
Well, we've kind of covered a lot of the advice things. So that's good. That's good. That was the next question.
Sure.
Let's talk about, you spent a lot of time in Wicked. I know that you played a couple different companies in Wicked, didn't you? Can you kind of, because we had a lot of kids that were interested in what you did and how you got that job. Can you just talk about that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. I remember going to this open call for a non-union open call, and it was in Los Angeles. And what happened was that means they had to see the couple hundred union members first, and then if they have time, they'll see the non-union members. And I remember being towards the end, and they finally just told everyone in the room, they said, we're not going to have time to see everyone. You guys get to go in. You're going to be singing 8 bars of music. So that was all we had. So I remember coming in with Lost in the Wilderness by Stephen Schwartz, who wrote Wicked. And I knew I just had to belt the end of it and just show them I could do that, And I remember just going in for the last 8 bars, belted it, and they literally just handed me the paperwork. They said, okay, you're going to have a callback for this track in this show. And I realized it was this track that a friend of mine had told me. He's like, you're really right for Wicked. There's this understudy for Bach that belts high notes, and he has to belt high Bs. And I was like, well, that sounds like a great track. I mean, B is kind of like, I don't want to be belting him every day, but I knew I needed a job, and I knew I wanted that job. So I remember going out of town, or I remember having my callback. I had it with, there were 2 people in the room. It was one of Bernard Telsey's assistants, and then one of the associate directors of Wicked. And I remember it going really well, feeling good about it. I hadn't heard anything, and I flew to Vermont to play Peter Pan in Peter Pan. And it was interesting because even though I'd gone in for Wicked as a non-union actor, I'd actually booked my first equity job as Peter Pan. So this was huge, and it was a really weird undertaking for me because it was a play version of it. And I was so used to doing musical theater, but what they liked is I've gone in and auditioned for this director. He liked me for Peter Pan, but didn't like me for this other show, but they called me up to have me come in for Peter Pan. And they had me going back and forth between me and a girl. And finally the other girl that was reading for Peter Pan, they said, we need to see her as Wendy. They paired us together, and that was it. I got my equity card, worked there. While I was there, I get a phone call from an agency, and they were called Kazarian Spencer and Ruskin, and they called and they said, hey, we need you to come in. We want to talk to you about signing you, to our agency. And I was like, okay, because they said, yeah, you auditioned for Wicked. Telsey gave us your number and said you didn't have any representation. And so I said, sure. So I said, I'll be back in 2 weeks when this gig is done. I'll be back in LA. If you, what do you need me to bring in? I can bring a song, bring 2 songs, whatever you need. They said, no, you're good. You just come in and we'll sign you. And I was like, okay. So I came back, I signed with them, and I remember going in for Wicked again. And this was for the Los Angeles company of Wicked. So they were looking to open a brand new company of Wicked. And I remember I had a call back for Bach this time, not the Bach understudy. And I went in, I was ready to go for Bach. And then they're like, actually, can you sing those high Bs? And I was like, oh dear gosh, good thing I'm warm up enough right now. And I did. And they said, could you do that 8 shows a week? And I looked out there and I didn't even realize, the faces that were in front of me were Bernard Telsey from Telsey Casting, Joe Mantello, like these names were huge, but it was almost to my benefit not recognizing them. I just knew I just had to focus and do the work. And I got a phone call within a week and they said you had booked Wicked and I was going to be going on tour with Wicked as a Bach understudy. So I was like, okay, that sounds pretty cool. I was hoping to stay in LA at the time, but, booking the tour was a great opportunity and I was not going to say no. So this was huge. It was my first, big Broadway show. And, I get a phone call and they said, by the way, actually, we're going to be moving you to the Los Angeles company. The person who was going to move, what happened was at this point, a lot of people wanted to move from the other companies into the Los Angeles company because a lot of people just wanted to be in LA so they can audition for TV and film things. So one of the guys from the First National doing the track that I was replacing him for was supposed to open in Los Angeles. Well, he ended up hurting himself in the show and they said, we can't have him be injured while we're opening the show. Can you open the Los Angeles production? And I was like, sure. So then this meant I got to now, instead of doing a 2-week rehearsal period to get into the show, I got to do a 4-week rehearsal period in New York City at 42nd Street Studios. Like I was living the life there. It was incredible with people like Megan Hilty, Carol Kane. Oh my God, what was the name of our wizard? John Rubinstein. His father's Arthur Rubinstein. Like there were just some really awesome. Adam Lambert was in the show with me, just all these incredible people. And I remember getting to rehearsals, but before we got there, I knew I was singing tenor 1 and I'd heard there was only 2 tenor 1s that they were singing in the show. And everyone else had multiple people to a part, but tenor 1s, they only had 2 of us. And I remember realizing I needed to know this music before I went into rehearsal because you do not want to be grabbing notes out of the air if you're belting. You want to make sure you know exactly where it is, strong and ready, And so I actually had almost all of my music memorized by the time I got to rehearsals because I put everything into Finale, which I did learn from East Stroudsburg High School. So I literally clicked every single note and I listened to it over and over and over again until I got everything in my head. And I remember getting in there and they were like, okay, let's have the tenor 1 sing together. And it's me and Adam Lambert. I am shaking, freaking out, and I'm singing, but I'm not belting it. I'm just singing it in my head voice. And they were like, okay. Now, usually this would be a solo for your track, Michael, but we're going to probably audition people. It's not set in stone. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they think you can't belt this, Michael. I said, you know exactly what to do. So I said, no more of that. We put it all together. I belted so loud, ready to go, belted the crap out of the solo. I said, yeah, that solo's yours. And that was it. And I knew at that point, I could not go backwards. I had to just keep balls to the wall because Adam Lambert, hit it hard. Adam Lambert doesn't have a very loud voice. He's a very interesting sound, but it's a mixy sound. He can do a lot of really cool things that I can't do. But mine is that loud, brassy, you name it, like Ethel Merman, loud, belted, bright, open sound. And I knew I was just going to have to sing it as loud as I could and just do it because that's what they wanted me to do. And it was just one of those things where thank goodness I knew what I was doing, but I could see in the moment, I was like, you're about to lose this. And I knew I was ready and I was prepared for it. So that was it. From that moment forward, I didn't think I wavered. I felt like things were going really well for me. And then we get to LA and we're getting ready for previews, and we have our first preview, and our Bach does the show. Second preview, and he calls out sick. Third preview, he calls out sick. Well, they had another Bach understudy who already knew it from the Chicago company of Wicked. But our stage manager pulled me aside and said, just so you know, New York called me and they said, we need to talk to you. You were their second choice. You were some people's first choice, but you were Joe Mantello's second choice. They went with the TV actor, and this guy had actually played Jack in Into the Woods on Broadway, the revival. And he was from Picket Fences. His name is Adam Wiley. He's had a pretty good career. He used to play like Chip in Beauty and the Beast, but he was having some issues and he was getting some stage fright issues. I don't really know exactly what was happening, but there were some personal issues that were happening. And so they had a rehearsal for me and they said, can you go on tonight? And I went on without a put-in, and I went on during previews, and I did Bach for most of the previews. And I mean, you have no idea, shot out of a cannon, just like, this is where preparation and opportunity match, and you have to be ready, right? Because legally, I could have fought with my union. One of my union could have fought for me and said, you cannot technically put him in the show without a put-in. But I said, I'm absolutely ready to go. I've been following him around. I've been writing every little detail of every costume change. I know how to do this. And I went on without a single thing going wrong, and that was it. And I knew after about 40 times of going on that first year of the show that role was going to be mine. And sure enough, by the end of that the first year, because he had called out so much, I mean, they called me, they said that the part's yours if you want it, and I was like, absolutely. So I got to play Bach for a year after that. I did 2 contracts of it. And the show was moving to San Francisco, and I'm like, oh, this is perfect, I'll get to go with the show to San Francisco. No, they wanted to hire a different Bach and a different Glinda and a different Elphaba. And I didn't realize how that works, but the idea is they want their fans to see something different every time they come in. Otherwise, people get really sick of the show. They also know it's wear and tear on the body, so they just like to keep it fresh. So my moment was pretty awesome because I got to be in a lot of books. I got to be in programs that were being sold around the world, because at that point, there was Tokyo, there was it was in Sydney, Australia. So to know that like even my face was a whole page of a book was pretty awesome. So that was like my moment in the sun. But I realized at that point, like, I also got pretty depressed because I thought if I hadn't said yes to Bach, I would still have a job, because I would still have my ensemble track. Because as long as you don't get fired, you once you get past your first 6-month rider, you are basically locked into the show. Otherwise, they'll have to buy you out of your contract, which is somewhere around $40,000, which they don't want to do. And so they try to avoid that, or they'll look for ways to get you fired. So I was just really frustrated because it felt like I had gotten, the show I dreamed of. And just because I saw that opportunity and I thought it was a great idea at the time, I realized that I'd kind of put myself in a scenario where now I'm auditioning all over again. So I'm back in LA, and there's not many musical theater auditions there. I do a workshop here and there. But you're auditioning for like the Creature from the Black Lagoon at Universal Studios. And it's like, that can't be where I went from that point in my career to there, And it was interesting. I remember just kind of having a really sort of rough couple months. And I remember it was about 6 months later or so, they called me and they said, Michael, how soon could you get to New York? And I was like, well, what do you mean? They said, well, we have an opening on Broadway. We had an injury. We need someone to come in right now. And I was like, absolutely. So I got there. I had to relearn the show because I had to do my original Bach understudy track, but I had to do it on a raked stage, which means that the stage is on an angle. So there's a lot of tricks to that. There's a lot more moving parts to the Broadway version of the show. There's a lot more lifts. There's like a bicycle that I would ride as like a rickshaw driver, because I had a couple little bit parts in the show. But I remember within 2 days I got in, and all of a sudden I remember getting out there and I got to the curtain call and I just sobbed and I just said, I have got to be here in New York. I've got to stay with this show. It's like, this is it. This is where you need to be. So I made my Broadway debut. My dream was to make it by 30. I was 30 at that point. So I was like, that's close enough. I will say the year of 30, this is good. And basically what happened was the guy, after 2.5 months, had to come back to the show. He was over his injury. And they said, Michael, we have an opening on the second national tour. Would you want to go out there? And I was like, sure. So they had me re-audition for the show, which was interesting. They just had me to do it for one of the associate directors. And then I got a phone call just saying, okay, you're going to go on the tour. And I didn't really know much about it at the time. But I know now, basically what the tour means, if you do a Broadway production contract tour, you're going to be getting your base salary on Broadway, which is, the equity-based salary, but you get a per diem on top of that. Well, I learned quickly that just now doubled my paycheck, and you have untaxed, per diem, which basically means like allowance, so you're paying for your hotels, you're paying for your food, but they're basically paying for you to be away from home full time, because at this point, once you're on tour, you only have 1 day off a week and you get 1 week off every 6 months. And so it's kind of a rigorous schedule, but let's just say I stayed out there for 9 years because it was so good. It was so easy because the money just was too easy to save up at that point. I was able to pay off my college loans. I paid off my car. I bought a condo in New York. Like it was just, so that's the one thing people don't realize, the value in if you can get out of New York City, because a lot of people get snobby about taking jobs. They only want to take a job on Broadway. They don't really want to go on tour. But I remember learning early on from other people that have been on tour, they said, this is where you can make all the money and save it. And so for me, it was a win-win because instead of getting bored with one show in New York, I was able to go to 91 different cities and have an opening night every couple weeks or every 2 months. I mean, that excitement of walking out a red carpet for a show that in New York, it's great. But when you think about it, if you come to Kansas City, Missouri, they're going to roll out that red carpet. If you go to Vancouver, British Columbia, they're going to roll out that red carpet. They're going to have parties for you. They're going to have, so it really was the life. I really enjoyed it. And I think it really helped keep it fresh because with the audience feeling that way and that excitement, you constantly had an opening night, you had a closing night, you had press nights where they were reviewing the show constantly. So
I think that's fantastic insight. Several people had questions about what was it like touring. Most of the experience that we would have, or high schoolers would be thinking, yes, that Broadway is it. And well, yeah, agreed. You nailed that. I mean, that's fantastic insight in terms of like not understanding that touring is a really great opportunity. We've said a lot at this program that don't sleep on the touring companies that come in to do Spam-A-Lot at Fulton, or, that come into Hershey Theater. Or, these are professional actors, but with that added to that, with your insight and your experience, that it's also a really great way to make money and save up money and do something you love. I think that's just really fantastic.
Because you're not paying for rent. You're not having to pay for anything. So it's like you really can kind of live the life, not live the life, but be immersed in it. You know what I mean? It's so wonderful. And you get to really live and eat and breathe the show,
So what was it? I mean, with that being said, I'm sure the other side of touring is that you mentioned it, the rigor, you're traveling, the probably lots of hours on the road, the jumping from one.
Sure. Yeah, I will tell you, so the hardest things that I dealt with on the road, so with traveling, that you're more susceptible to germs when you're flying. So our tour we were flown from city to city. Now, what happened was they gave us the option, if we wanted to drive the tour, they would pay us back our flights. So you're talking, I had my Prius, which was really great on gas. I could fill the car up. I didn't have to be with castmates on travel days, because when you're doing travel days, you have 2 days to travel with the company. And sometimes you just don't want to be on an airplane where people are singing, So it was kind of nice to get away from people, but I would make money. I would probably make $250, to drive from, Kansas City to, let's say if it was El Paso, Texas. But that being said, I would save that money because I wasn't really paying much for a hotel overnight. If I had to stay in a hotel overnight, the gas was nothing. So I really actually loved driving the tour. Now, not all tours are able to do that, but a lot of your production contract ones you are able to do it. So, it was great because then I got to see the country, and so just even taking that in, because you kind of know what a city looks like, but it's interesting to see how they kind of connect together and how you will be in the middle of Texas. You're like, there's no way I'm ever going to see a human ever again or a city. And sure enough, then you show up and now you're in Dallas, so it's interesting. But with that comes, with me, my biggest problems were I found when I was either in the Ohio River Valley or somewhere around the Panhandle, I guess, or New Orleans, Texas, Dallas. Those were areas where I'd have some severe sinus problems because of just the way the allergies were. So imagine you're getting to a new city and you're having all these new sets of allergies and problems. So a trick that we learned quickly was if you could get some local honey, you sort of get that into your body, and your body sort of, I guess, creates, I don't know what it does. There's something scientific it does. All I know is it helps you build up to those allergens that are there, basically. So a lot of times you would do that, but it was hard because sometimes you would go to work and you think you were okay, and I would not realize I had a little bit of a sinus infection, and you would sing on it, and I'm going to be honest. We could talk about vocal injuries because I've had them. I mean, when you've done, because total with Wicked, I did it for 11 years. You cannot do the same show for 11 years, especially one where I said, they wanted me to sing B's, but I'm like, I can do them, but they're not easy, so I have to be at 100% every single time. So if you even come in at 80%, sometimes you can get away with it, and sometimes you can end up damaging your chords. And there would be times where I just could feel something was wrong, and I know it sounds awful, but I would have to call out sick midway through the show, and that happens. But I knew that if I kept singing on it, I could do more damage. And most of the time I go in and they say, you got a little bit of a pre-nodule. Why don't you stop singing on it and you just go on vocal rest for 2 weeks, which is not fun at all. But you literally just sit there with a dry erase board. The company understands, and it's part of the gig. And it sucks. That's the part that was really hard, was going through those moments alone in a hotel room. Because you can imagine I don't even know sign language. So it's not like I could go out and communicate with people. It was either pointing at a text message on a phone or trying to use a dry erase board. So at moments like that got really difficult, and most of the times those injuries would happen because I didn't know when to just say, call out sick today. Just call out. It's probably not best for you to sing on this. You know what I mean? If it feels like a little bit of work, maybe it's not the best idea to sing on it, but I would always try to push through. And sometimes it worked well and sometimes it didn't. But letting them know that that's real and that happens and it's okay, and not to shame people on vocal injuries. It's interesting. You have dancers, they can sprain their ankle and they'll be out for, they could be out for eight months, or whatever, a neck injury. And yet a vocal injury, people say, oh, you don't know how to sing correctly. And it's just a really, really, it's a bad stigma. And it's not true, because I've known alphabas midway through a show hemorrhage, and their voice goes out in the middle of Defying Gravity, and it's scary, but at the same time, these things happen, and I watched someone that I thought, will she ever sing again? And she's not only sung again, she's led Broadway shows over and over again, and she just played Elsa on Broadway for 2 years, and she did an excellent job. So just know that stuff will happen. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be foolish, but support each other. And you just don't know how these things happen. They just do. For me, like I said, it would be in those environments. And after a while, I started realizing, oh my goodness, when I'm in these environments, this is when my allergies, these were when these things were kicking in, and it doesn't mean that I lost all my technique. It just means that it was tired, it needed a break. So that's the big thing too, is knowing that stuff happens, and knowing when to just say, hey, cut it off and don't sing today, and people will respect that.
That's really awesome advice, and you've covered actually a lot of the things that we wanted to ask you. Can we cycle back
over a little bit? Yeah.
Can we cycle back to the audition part of it? Can you talk a little bit about like how often did you audition for shows, and maybe like what percentage of roles did you get that you tried out for? I know you said you kind of stumbled into the Wicked thing, and that turned out to be a real career changer for you. But what about other auditions, and how do you deal with that rejection? How many roles did you get that you auditioned for, that type of thing?
Yeah, I will tell you the great rule of thumb is, and this is going to sound absolutely insane, but it will make sense to them, and I think it will help them later, is for every 29 shows you audition for, you'll get the 30th. It's that much rejection. So that's the thing, is yes, I worked for 20 years. I'm very grateful for that. But I went to a lot of auditions, and when you're in between gigs, you have nothing else to do. And when you're in New York, you can audition often. There's so many auditions, especially in January, especially in this, when when the audition seasons are, if you can get in there. I mean, we would have days where I would have my buddies, and I'd be like, you sign me up at that audition, I'll sign you up at this one. Let me know where are they at there. They're at number 300 here. They're at number 200 here. And you would be going back and forth between studios to try to get in multiple auditions in a day. I mean, you got to put the work in. And I can't tell you how many people I went to college with that they graduated and moved to New York and they couldn't get to auditions. They broke down after like their second or third. And you got to know how to keep moving, and it will happen, and you will find your niche and you'll find where you belong, but you got to throw a lot of spaghetti at that wall to see if one sticks.
Can you talk about that? You said not to get into those that didn't make it, but I think there's something to be said there, that they ran into a couple bouts of rejection to probably supremely talented people in their small ponds, wherever they're coming from the nation, converging in New York. They get into the audition and they are talented people, but it's the rejection, or it was that they didn't want to do that pound the pavement to get.
It was a little bit of both. I think the rejection was starting to get to them and they were getting tired of doing those auditions, right? But for me, I think the biggest things that I learned is, well, what can I do? Why don't I try to do it all? In some way, it was almost like, what was happening too is when you're non-union, you're just waiting in lines. There's hundreds and hundreds of people, and we're talking girls, guys. It's crazy. So I found that if I could get seen for a dancer in a show, they can see 30 people at a time. So if I could get a call back after dancing, then I knew I could pretty much book the gig, if that makes sense. Because I knew that if they were okay enough with my dancing, they're surely going to like what I'm going to do with these little character parts. Because what happens is I always felt like the reason why I was able to work was I could always dance well enough, but man, they knew I could hold a scene, because you want jets that look like they would really be in a gang. You want them to sound like that, and I've, even in a chorus line, Nick, I've played two completely different roles in that show, so, I don't know. I think the biggest thing was just getting myself in front of their faces. And I think for me, I kind of went a different angle of going to more dance auditions at that time just because I couldn't get seen for the singers yet. Now once you get an agent and once you get to a certain point, they can get you appointments. It's a little bit easier. But that being said, that was my route I had to go. And I did a lot of jobs where, I never thought it, but I was a dance captain at Dorney Park. Like I didn't ever see that coming, So, and it's funny because now as an equity member, Wicked's like, we'll put you off to the side. We'll have the dancers come out front. So I'm not really considered a dancer in that world, but you really don't know. It just depends on the show and it depends on the style,
I think one of the greatest things in listening to you talk and share your story and your experience and your journey is just solidifying home that, that resiliency and the don't give up and the keep at it spirit that I'm seeing and sensing in you is so important. And because it is going to be so easy to give up and to walk away because you're going to be told no more than you're going to be told yes in this business.
Absolutely.
So I just think it's a fantastic reminder to everybody that's watching that, to not give up.
And I will tell you the biggest thing that I forgot that is huge. The most important thing is anybody can sing. A lot of people can dance. Guess what? A lot of people can't do? Act at the same time as those things. And I can't explain it, but it's really true. That is the one thing that I had is I could wear a character and I could wear it really well. Like they knew, like I remember even in Wicked, the character track that I was in was originated by this, I don't want to say this bigger guy, but he was a short, bigger guy, but like powerhouse voice, but he was just insane. And they told me, they were like, you're in the front in every mob scene, you better bring it. And I'm like, okay. I tried on my wig. It was like down here. I was like, oh, I'm like Schmeagol. I was like, oh, I've got this. I knew that I could just go for it. And that's the biggest thing is if you can attack, not be afraid and just go for it and really commit to these characters, they're going to love that. And I know that was the biggest reason why they loved me for so long. When I felt it, they would always encourage me. They were like, guys, look what Michael's doing. Do it. Go as far as him. He's going far. You guys are not doing it. Because the sad reality is there's a lot of people that book Wicked and they get the understudy for Glinda and they think that they're just the standby for Glinda and that they don't really have to do anything. They're just in the ensemble. They're like, meh, I'll hold my torch. I'll hold this spear. And they don't care. And it's like, oh my goodness, how could you get this far? And just because you didn't book Glinda, that means you don't see the value in your job. So again, remember I told you, it seems bizarre to you, but it happens all the time because people want to be the leads. And we have, I have a friend of mine who is...
It doesn't seem bizarre.
It's not bizarre.
It's bizarre. And there are so many people that need to hear that.
And my thing is that I always knew from a young age. I think that's why I think I loved musical theater. It was like I said, I'd rather be in the ensemble. You think I want to be the person that's got to be like, well, I'm on vocal rest all day. Oh, I'm doing, it's stressful. It comes with so much stress and strain. Not that the ensemble members aren't dealing with that kind of stress, but it's just different, And for me, I just am glad to be on that stage.
So we have a saying here at CYPA that when I took over a few years ago, where I noticed that in the work of the ensemble, where I would go see Wizard of Oz or I'd go see shows and the leads were good and they did what leads would do, but I would see munchkins not happy to be in the land of Oz. And I remember I'm taken out of it completely. And so my face expression to your comment about that was, yes, that's crazy that still happens. But at the same time, I think that's a learned behavior that we will try really hard to push at CYPA, saying things like, you are not just ensemble. If I hear anybody say I am just in the ensemble, everybody knows that freaks me out. And this is validating because you're the most important. Everybody in the ensemble should be a lead in the real world. Is a lead possible?
Yeah, and all you have to do is create a character. You just have to create an intention. What do you want? You're coming on stage for a reason. Who are you? If you answer all of those questions, it will be easy, right? So everyone asks, like, how is it sustaining a show for that long? Well, all I knew is if I handled it as an actor, the people that were really the bored ones were the ones that went to music conservatories, Boston Conservatory to be, but what happens is they become all about the voice and the singing, but they forget, well, why? I mean, if you don't know why, then you're not going to care about it. So the great thing with Wicked is the sort of, the underlying tones are a lot of, it's about fear. It came out of 9/11, the writing of it, and just that sort of mob mentality of all this. So I'm constantly like, what's in the paper today? I'm going to use this today, and you can supplement things. What does that feel like, that fear? Or what could make you this angry? And if you can dig deeper every single time, and you can really think about these characters, you're going to forget that you're even on stage. It's just going to be a blur of just joy and just commitment. And that's what they love, And so I think, and one thing to note is that I have seen people get blacklisted after being that terrible in an ensemble. You can be that great of a fear understudy. If you acted like a jerk, you'll never work again. They will know. I mean, the business is that small. And when you have people from Bernard Telsey coming that often and they sneak in for visits, you better be given 100% every time. And that was the thing, is that they always knew. Because remember, there were people too that when they knew there were special people in the audience, they pulled up, if you will. They gave their extra. But guess what? You think that people don't, there's a show report every single night. They know if you are marking, if you are not. So those people may think they're getting away with it, but it will definitely catch up with them. So even now, when I finally put my notice in to leave Wicked, even then, the director came up to me and the associate, and she just said, Michael, come back whenever you want. I see you as a Dr. Dillman. Take a couple years, go do interior design, come back, once you're older. She said, we'll have you back in a heartbeat. I mean, that is a testament to like, oh my goodness, thank God. I don't have to belt high notes and you still like me. Like, I've
That's
done
awesome. That's really awesome advice. And you hit on so many things that I'm so glad you said, because people need to hear that. But if we do need to wrap things up here so that this isn't too long, but you kind of segued into it because a couple of the kids had asked what made you decide to pursue a career in interior design. And you kind of alluded to that you don't want to give up on acting.
No.
But, if you could just real quick.
Yeah, well, what happened was I thought that I could live a life like everyone else, and I thought I could live in a house in North Carolina with my family, and that would be enough. And I realized it just isn't. It didn't. I like it, but I realized I could do interior design in New York, and now I have a contact for someone that is, obviously once New York comes back, I'm aware of the way things are right now, but there's a contact to even design dressing rooms. I'm like, sign me up. I will do whatever it takes. But I've realized that it was good to try something else, but I miss it so much. And so I think I need a dual career. And I think right now it was a good time to leave because I knew I couldn't be the 40-year-old trying to cover a 20-year-old forever, And so I thought, why don't I leave on good terms? Why don't I sort of try something else? I was getting really burnt out with traveling, with everything. But once I got into a house, I realized, well, I bought all this stuff. This was stupid. I don't need, it's not for me. I really miss that. I'd rather be in a small little studio apartment in New York and be happy, And so, it was a learning experience. I hope I can use both in some regards, but it feels like right now, I have to start at the very beginning as an interior designer. But if I kind of go back to the auditions, I think I'll just pick up where I left off with Wicked, and that's what I'm hoping for. So hopefully they'll see it that way. But it's been a nice two-year kind of rest. I've learned a lot. I've got to teach, which I know you guys know. You learn so much from teaching. You see other people and you see what works, and you see where you're like, wow, I can see where I fall in those pitfalls or whatever that is. And you see just the value in just watching the process of how you articulate things. And yeah, I think I'm just ready to kind of get back into it. But I think, again, remember all my training was I was a 20-year-old guy in college learning how to be the fun, excited, crazy, 20-year-old, and now I'm 40. So it's like I have to now figure out how to be maybe the cool dad or maybe I don't really know what these parts are like. So I haven't really gotten to wear them often, so it will be interesting. But I will say, a dream role is Timon in Lion King. I've had some good callbacks for it. That would be right up my alley. He can be a guy, he can be an adult, he can be energized. It's sort of all the right things right up my alley. So that would be a fun role someday. So we're from your lips, from my lips to God's ears, whatever, we want this to happen. So Put it out there.
I could see you in that role. That's cool. So we're gonna wrap things up here. This has been awesome, Michael. Mr. Hodge, do you have anything else that you'd like to ask?
No, I'm like kind of shaking in a good way about the comments about being a good person, do good work, show up, and have fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing is why would you do it if it isn't fun, right? It's got to be fun to some regard. Yes, auditions are scary, but God, once you book that, I mean, you cannot, from that moment forward, it is the most stressful thing learning a show within 2 weeks, sweating, but I couldn't have it any other way, because right now I'm working with computers and I didn't realize that interior design was so much with computers. And I realized that it's just a scene partner I don't want to be with anymore. It's 12 hours of staring at a computer and then it's going to work on a program and then it's going to render on a program. And, it's just, for me, once I learn it, like I thought it took me a while to learn things. I'm like, oh, no. I could learn this by now, be done. And I know it by now. And I'm going to show up and be ready, but
we can really relate to the 12 hours on the computer now. So
you've described adequately online learning.
Really miss the face-to-face, but
I'm proud of you guys. I don't know how you're doing what you're doing right now. I'd love to hear that, but yeah. If you want to, my email address is michaeledwarddrolet@gmail.com. So it's michaeledward@drolet@gmail.com. If anybody wants to send me an email or anything, tell them to any questions, anything.
How can they follow you on Instagram or social media?
No, I would not like to have any more followers. Of course they can follow me. I'm like, are you kidding me? Can you imagine? I have 3 followers, so I'll take a couple more. That'd be nice. So
great.
Yeah.
So they can find you on Instagram. We will, we'll follow up with you on that too as well, and maybe we can get that written out, and we'll forward that out to the rest of CYPA because I'm sure they're going to want to make connections. They love to. They've been unfortunately trained in a good way, I guess, to reach out to people and message people who see shows, and you know what? People respond and there's learning to happen. So we appreciate your willingness to do that. You might get a few comments.
Yeah, no worries. And if you ever want to do this again, you let me know. We're here. We got to help each other through this. So in a lot of ways, this kind of helped give me vision again, and it's exciting. So I really thank you for letting me be part of this too. So.
All right. Well, I'm gonna shut the recording off here. Thank you, Michael. We really appreciated hearing from you, and you gave us a lot of good advice. So thank you very much.
But keep doing the good stuff. You guys sound like you get it. You sound like you're great teachers. You sound like you're doing all the supportive, kind things, and it's good. So keep doing it. And